Welcome to the course overview. I am Dr. Jason White, a social scientist and instructor for this course. This presentation is a general overview of the topics we will be discussing in this course. Ethics can be described as standards of behavior that tell us how human beings ought to act in the many situations in which they find themselves. To be more precise, ethics may also consider the development of personal individual standards. Ethics definitions by specific professions may only differ slightly. According to the American Psychological Association, ethics is a set of principles developed or followed that are morally right by individuals, groups, or cultures. According to the National Association of Social Workers, ethics is a system of moral principles and perceptions about right versus wrong and the resulting philosophy of conduct that is practiced by an individual, group, profession, or culture. Plato and Aristotle's philosophies on moral judgment were influential on policy development, and were the foundation of subsequent philosophies. Plato focused on the act and the rule, very similar to later philosophies such as Immanuel Kant's moral judgment, also known as deontology, or categorical imperative, which focuses on duties and rights exclusive to the act. Both David Hume and Kant agreed on many things such as virtue and duty, though in-depth reviews indicate that they did not agree on every aspect of virtue and duty. Hume believed that morality was not something that could be specifically defined and instead discussed other constructs, looking at similar situations and assessing how they could learn from those outcomes. Kant looked at supreme rules a priori, meaning that he believed some rules or laws were applicable no matter the situation, such as thou shalt not kill applying to everyone regardless of situation. Hume might argue that situations involving killing might be dependent on the consequences of that action. Hume was a consequentialist and Kant was a categoricalist, consequential being an evaluation of the consequences of an act to define morality, whereas categorical being an evaluation of the duties and rights as they relate to the act. Consequentialism, also known as classical utilitarianism, focuses on the consequences of an act and the greater good. More modern utilitarianism was built on by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, to influence social reform, specifically policy and law. Bentham and Mill believed that people were guided by pleasure and pain, with Bentham believing that if most people chose the greater pleasure, guides to decision-making could be established. The justice virtue, introduced by John Rawls, considers principles involving egalitarianism. The justice virtue is about fairness. According to Michael Sandel, principles of justice are best derived from a hypothetical contract, and that the hypothetical contract be carried out in an original position of equality behind the veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance is a construct to identify equality. For example, Rawls might say, according to Sandel, imagine that you were going to be born into the world without knowing where you would be born, who your parents were, or what their socioeconomic status was. What kind of rules should be in place to ensure equality and fairness to succeed? Care ethics is a large theory developed by feminists in the later part of the 20th century. It is an ethical theory that looks at what actions are right and wrong. All individuals are interdependent to achieving their interests. Those that are vulnerable should have greater consideration, and the level of vulnerability and personal choices is to be considered also. Many ethical theories were developed to be universal, while care ethics focuses on the unique relationship between two individuals, not necessarily requiring an equal relationship regarding to care. Carol Gilligan, a follower of Lawrence Kohlberg, is probably one of the most notable ethicists in the field of care ethics. She did not agree with his ideas that care ethics should be universal and principled, and found his research to be gender-biased. Gilligan believed that moral reasoning might be expressed differently by genders at different times, though she did attempt to reiterate that moral reasoning should not be obscured by gender. She also believed that caregivers might feel there is a lesser obligation to those needing care when they are at a distance, arguing against a universal application of caring ethics. It has been argued subsequently that gender does not have an influence in moral reasoning processes. The crux of the theory is that unequal relationships are okay in certain circumstances. Environmental ethics is a philosophy of ethics that focuses on the human relationship with the environment, not just mitigating harm to the planet, but the environment as a whole. As an example, under this ethics framework, the human relationship with animals would be a consideration. This slide is a comparison chart of the 6 major ethics theories discussed in this course. At the end of the course, you will have enough of an understanding to create your own outline to analyze the need for a policy or appropriateness of a policy. Please pause the video to take a few minutes to review this slide. That concludes this presentation. Thank you for watching.